and Joe Miller. And we're going to talk to you guys today about our new job placement contract, or rather our proposed job placement contract, some of the changes we're proposing to make in this new contract year, which will start on October 1st with all contracts ending by then. Before I get too into this stuff, I wanted to touch base on a few basic things about this webinar. If you cannot hear, or you're having issues with sound, or you're having issues with the picture, please go ahead and on your menu bar, the tab for questions, go ahead and put a comment in there. It's the only box we have open up here in central office, so that's how we're going to view our communications with people out there listening to the webinar. So if you have issues with sound or picture or anything like that, go ahead and put it in the questions section. This is also the area where you will put questions in later on when we get through our presentation today. And when we get through our presentation today, it's how we'll answer questions coming from the field. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump in to the presentation. Obviously, what we have going on here and why we are here today is to hear about our job placement contract. So I'll give you a little bit of an idea of what we're going to be covering. We're going to cover why we're changing the contract. And we're going to cover what has the planning process been like up until now. So who have we engaged with, how have we engaged, as well as we're going to jump into what are the proposed changes. We're going to talk about the flow, as well as the definitions that we're working on changing that will affect the job placement contract and some service delivery in the field. We'll have some time for questions and answers, so please go ahead and get ready to ask some questions in the questions tab. We'll get to as many of those questions as we can in the allotted time. And then we'll go over what's next, as far as what next steps there are, as well as give you an idea of how to submit feedback to us, because this is a process in which we're putting forth our proposed changes, and we really want to get feedback back from the field on what you guys see as the positives and the perhaps some parts we need to work on as we move forward with this contract. So much like the contract 5 years ago, we're trying to, one of the things we learned from that 5 years ago is we needed to get in contact with the field a little earlier in the process and really get some feedback. So that's going to be really important. Why are we making changes to the contract? Well, it really falls into three main categories. We have, like I said a minute ago, it's a 5-year contract. We've had this contract going for 5 years. That's the limit of time we're allowed to have a contract. And it was just time to reevaluate how things were going with our job placement efforts and see how that was going. We had some legal sufficiency issues, and we also needed to meet the changing times. So I'm going to explain a little bit from each of those three reasons why we're changing the contract. The 5-year contract, time to reevaluate. As we look at this, we realized that the current job placement contract had created a very disjointed VR process, a process in which we talked about things that were inside the contract and outside of the contract. That didn't always make sense to the field, and it didn't always make sense to our vendors or our clients, because what we were really dealing with was a VR process, and we had kind of drawn this weird line in the middle that said this is a contract and this is not in the contract. We found that we had some inconsistent statewide practices and some inconsistencies around equity of services across the state. As we looked at it a little closer, we found out that our procurement tool was very labor-intensive for our staff as well as for the vendors, and that the roles and responsibilities of VR and our vendors were not clearly delineated in the old contract. Some of the reasons around legal sufficiency, we felt like it was time to look at a new contract where our procurement requirements had evolved over time. Our contract had not evolved. We've essentially been sitting around for 5 years with essentially the same contract in place. Even though there had been some changes at the midway point, it was still, from a contract standpoint, essentially the same contract. In our language, we drew a big line between contracted services and vendor services, and this big line created the appearance of conflict of interest and abuse. And so an example of that, anytime we had a contractor who was providing job placement services and job prep services, it appears from a contract standpoint as if they're double dipping or getting paid for the same thing twice. That wasn't necessarily what was happening. It was, however, an appearance that we needed to work on as we went to take this new contract, or as we go to take this new contract through legal sufficiency. We are also pressing the limits of our delegation agreement. And what our delegation agreement is our ability to use our AFPs as essentially work orders. And we had kind of pushed beyond what we'd agreed to 5 years ago as we moved forward with our contract. So we needed to evaluate that. And we also have a continued need to standardize our review process to ensure that there's quality, consistency, and compliance. Additionally to it just being time to look at the contract and some of the legal sufficiency issues, we were in a different environment than we were 5 years ago. So we needed to take those changing times into account. We've gotten new guidance and focus on improving performance-based contracts from the department level as well as the federal level. We needed to take into account the CCO structure and the expansion of the IPS model and the impact that was having on our contracts as well as our ability to maintain those contracts. We needed to look at WIOA and state guidance to partner better with our workforce system. We also needed to look at the changing performance standards that are rolling out under WIOA. And lastly, we had to take into account both executive orders and the evolution of the Employment First policy. So as these things changed, it definitely became time to look at a new contract. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Robert Costello, and he's going to talk a little bit about the job placement process, the job placement process that we went through as we worked with our work group to make these proposed changes.
Great, thanks, Dan. So as Dan said, one thing that we realized we need to do was to get more input in developing the process along with this feedback time we're getting. So we brought together a group. Originally we had admin staff who were saying kind of what are we doing here? It's time to change, renew the contract. We want to try to bring more services in line with the contract rather than having that weird artificial separation between what is in the contract and what isn't. And we also wanted to get field staff input because you folks are the ones that know what's working out there, what isn't working, what's going to make this happen. So from field staff, we brought in a couple of clients. A couple of clients. We brought in a couple of VRCs. We brought in a manager. And we also brought in Office of Contracts and Procurement staff. So we'd have some information on what we could do and what we couldn't do. We were really kind of shooting in the dark without them. So Molly Jobert, Sabrina Cunliffe, and Jennifer Frank were brought in from the field. Thanks, all of you. We met weekly for 3 hours, a big time demand for the folks coming from the field to do this. There was a lot of work put into it, and we appreciate all the help that everyone gave to us. You know, we were hearing a lot of feedback from VRCs and support staff, from vendors and from admin on things that kind of had drifted with the contract, the current contract, the one that's expiring. It was done with the best knowledge that we had at the time. It was a good first start, but I think there was not maybe due diligence put into monitoring as we moved along, so things kind of drifted a little bit. From counselors, we were hearing there were capacity issues. We didn't have enough placement providers, and we had a system that wasn't really welcoming to new providers looking to come in, mainly because of the payment structure. Counselors were saying there was really there's too much lack of clarity in services in that distinction between what's in the contract, what's not in the contract, too much kind of hashing it out with vendors, client by client, vendor by vendor. When there was a question about what's in the contract, what's not in the contract, there really wasn't anyone to call. Cheryl was doing a great job of administering the contract, but she was one person for a huge job, and she was sticking to what was inside the contract. So if we had an issue of what's in, what's out, how do we make those two march together? We didn't have anyone to go to. From the vendor's point of view, one thing we've been hearing from them is that they've been getting clients unprepared by counselors, that there really isn't enough work happening with the counselor and the client ahead of time. They're just getting folks not really ready for work, not sure if they want to work without the advanced work done. We're also getting complaints about the payment structure. It was too backloaded. That was giving them all the risk. They're also saying there wasn't enough money, especially with the clients that are taking much more time and much more services. The supported employment, the customized employment, the job creation clients. And also the vendors are saying there was a lack of clarity on what services were in the contract, what wasn't in the contract, what's job prep, what isn't job prep. And with admin running the numbers, we were getting huge percentages from some vendors of billing outside the contract. and there were some questions on how to track what's going on, how to make sure that we're not paying twice, how to make sure there's equity across the vendors for this. And we were seeing in admin that we needed not only better language, tighter contract, but also to do a better job monitoring it. So that's what our work group was taking on. The technique we decided was to, we started looking at how do we change the contract. We realized what we really need to do was to look at the whole system, look at the rehab system, look at how we work with clients, and then make the contract serve that process rather than try to squeeze that process into some artificial contract. Joe's going to do the next slide on comparing current system and the new system.
So I think this time around we have a little more time, and we do want to be very respectful to our vendors. They're our partners, so we're going out to staff to listen to what your feedback is. We're also listening to the vendor feedback, and our goal is to try and make a system that's going to work for everyone. What you're going to find is that we've actually determined a little bit different list of services and defined them more specifically than we had some that had some catch-all categories that were tripping folks up in the field as well as vendors. You're going to see that we have looked at the expectation for the services and the outcomes to be more statewide, yet still allow for rural areas to have, meet with their vendors and have services that are appropriate for rural versus urban. But there will be, you'll find, I think, when you review the definitions and that piece in the system, that there's much more consistency. We're still working toward forms and some of the tools, and we are taking volunteers that want to help us to do that. And then also you will see a little bit different price structure here in just a minute. There's an equitability of service across the state, as well as across different populations of folks that we serve. So we have added another tier category for some increased costs that you'll hear about here. So I'm going to turn this back over to Robert, and he's going to lead us through the redesign of the system.
Thanks. So the first thing, not the first thing, after several meetings of not really getting anywhere, we decided to, instead of looking at the contract, look at the system and write out what's the optimal practice, the best practice of working with a client that's going to end up in job placement services. So the slide that we're on right now, draft of redesigned system, this first slide is showing working with a client from coming in the front door to the point that you decide that they're going to be going to job placement services, and looking at which track they're going to be in. So a couple things that one main thing we wanted to do was to stress the work that the counselor and the client need to do at their desk before we get them to the job developer, to ensure that we're doing the most we can to prepare the client for the experience, and also to get the information we need to pass on to the job developer so that we can know the person is ready for job placement services, they're motivated, reliable, dependable, this is what they want, they're ready to go there. And we've got enough information to give the job developer what they need to know where to start looking for the placement. As we know in the current contract, there wasn't a lot of room for the vendor to get to know the client, so they were suffering even more without having that information. We also wanted to weave into this the new 90-day to plan that we have from the new Workforce Act. And as we know from the training that Patrick's done around the state, early engagement is one of the keys to that. So we put in right away, right from the beginning of the client meeting with the counselor at intake, the counselor's thinking about what steps can we take towards early engagement. Is there anything in office? Is there contemplating change? program? Is there work strides, employability, workability? Is there a raw class there? Also, what else can we refer the client out to in the community? If they have the capability of accessing resources such as the employment department or WorkSource, what can we send them to there? The third box over on the right is just reminding that early engagement doesn't stop there but continues all the way through. So this is one thing that we're looking at for counselors to do with clients even before eligibility. At eligibility, as we know from the Rehab Act, the next thing that we need to be doing with the client, they say, as needed, the counselor will work with the client towards a comprehensive vocational assessment. This doesn't mean everyone gets sent out into the community for a trial work experience or community-based work assessment, but you're looking at all the information you have from the client, from anyone from the team they're coming in, from their work history, from medical documentation, and you're creating a comprehensive vocational assessment. What is the client's current, what are the client's current unique strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, etc. I believe in Oracle we're going to be putting in something that kind of maps this out because it really is a critical part in the process. Next step down is where are we going with plan development? Are we going towards job placement or another direction? In this flow diagram, we're looking just at folks that are going towards job placement, but there's obviously a lot of other clients that are not going there yet. It may be a training plan. It may be a worksite modification plan. It might be a rehab tech plan. There might be some more voc exploration that's needed. So those are off to the right on your screen. If it is someone that's looking towards job placement, we're going down straight to the next square, next blue rectangle. And again, I'm stressing that we're doing more work with the client to identify their particular strengths and resources. With your workload, we know that you can't always do all of this at your desk, such as setting up informational interviews, job shadows, vocational testing, etc. But to the extent that we can do this, we should be doing it. To the extent that we can utilize HSAs to do it, we should be doing that. To the extent that we need to send this out to vendors, we can definitely do that. But these are things that we need to be doing before we send it out to job placement because we need answers to questions before we're sending out to the job placement person. So this screen ends with getting the information we need, doing the assessments as needed to answer the questions we need to answer that we can't get from the client, from the team, and getting the answers to be able to determine the job placement model. Which puts us to the next screen. So we were told that it should be tracked rather than tracked, so we will make that. We'll look that up in Wikipedia and make that correction as needed. We're seeing off to the left that the VRC has determined that the client is prepared for and is in need of job placement referral. There is some history around the word preparation. I want to make sure that we are not assessing folks to death or we're not keeping them from job placement. But we do need to make sure that the person is prepared to the extent that they're going to have the best shot at being successful in job search assistance. We also need to know that the person needs job placement assistance. There are some folks that can self-place, can work through a job club or access employment in other ways. So once we do determine that the person is as prepared as they need to be for job placement, that they need the service, they're going to be put in one of the three tracks. Standard job placement is the same as it has been all along. The person has some varied, they're motivated, reliable, dependable. They've got the skills and abilities to do the job, but they're lacking access to or credibility with employers, so they need third-party placement. This is a person with a visible disability, someone that can't access the job market on their own. Now we have two tracks for the supported and customized employment. And we're going to probably have a fair amount of questions and conversations about how we tease out who's in track 2 and who's in track 3. The idea is that most supported employment clients are going to be in track 2, both mental health and IDD clients. This is going to be the majority of clients. But we're hearing from vendors that they're not compensated adequately for that smaller percentage of clients that needs much more intensive services. Now, this isn't anyone that needs job customization or job carve. It's not for anyone that cannot do the duties of the job, because that's pretty much anyone that's in supported employment. These are folks that need a much higher level of service because of their functional limitations. So once that decision is made, if it's track 1, 2, or 3, the same as with the current contract, there's going to be a referral made to the job developer. The counselor here is deciding which track the client is in before making the referral. That's a decision that the counselor will make. But again, there's going to be a referral to the job developer for the job developer to meet with the client, make sure this is someone that they feel that they are able to work with in place. There's a payment of $100 whether the job developer accepts the client or not. We're hoping before we get to this that we have enough marketing materials from job developers and enough data from our end to be able to provide clients with a very real informed choice. So it's not just, well, I know this one job developer, let's see how it goes. I know this was the intent in the last contract. We never quite got it together to have that material available. But as much as possible, we want to involve the client, the family, the team in looking at some real options for job placement provider. Again, the client or the vendor either can, just after that first meeting, can say, no, I don't think this is going to work. We can't have multiple vendors that the client meets with to decide who they want to choose. And the payment goes $100 each vendor they meet to compensate for their time coming in. Now, the next thing that happens is it's a new service in here. It's going to replace the proposal because we want something a lot more developed in the proposal. The other thing we're hearing from vendors is that there's no time on the front end to get to know the client, to get to know who this person is that I'm going to be marketing to employers. So between the next 2 payment points, the job strategies and the job strategy review and report, we are moving some money up front from what was in the payment structure in the current contract further down after placement or retention. We're moving some of that money up front for a couple reasons. One is that we're hearing clearly from vendors that they were having to take too much of the risk, that we weren't taking enough of the risk, and that it really was not a viable business model for them to have that much risk at the tail end. It also can impact which clients a vendor chooses to work with, because if they think it's going to take too long or be too problematic, they might not want to work with that client. The other reason that we put some money up front was to give the job developer some time to get to know the client before they start doing job placement at the front end. So what we're thinking of here is that the vendor will meet with the client several times, take the client out to the community, meet the client's family, get to know what is going to work and what isn't going to work, and come up with a document. It's a job placement strategy, and there's really 2 aspects to this report. One is, what are the unique situations in which the client is most likely to be successful? What's the environment and the overall framework of a job in which this client will have the best opportunity to succeed? The other part of it is, how am I going to find a job for this person given that unique environment that I've identified? It obviously has a higher payment for track 2 and 3 than for track 1. Track 1 is relatively easy. If the person has the competencies to do the job, it's going to be a much easier placement, much less work in figuring out where the client's going to be successful, much less work in getting to know the client and what their idiosyncrasies are. When you get clients that require a higher level of service, more time involved with the job developer, there's a higher payment point. So that first one is a report that comes back to the counselor. It's payable upon acceptance of that strategy. We really don't want cookie cutter, cut and paste strategies here. We want the job developer, the vendor, to be working with the client sufficiently to get to know them, to determine where they're going to be successful, and then to come up with a real strategy, not just, I'm going to call employers. So we want a real report here. And once the counselor accepts it, then they pay for it. The next step here, and that's upon acceptance of the job placement strategy report, job development starts. We have another payment point 1 month in. We're going to expect a report from the vendor every month, but at the first month, we are going to give another payment point, and this is to move some of the money forward so that the vendors aren't taking all the risk, and so that they have some money to go on while they are placing the client. And that report is going to be after 30 days of placement activity, and they're going to report back how successful was what I was thinking of. I wrote this strategy for what I thought was going to work. I've now road tested it for a month. What does it look like? Does it look like it needs some modification, some tweaking? Does it need a total rewrite? Is it good to go? How does it look? So they're going to give that first report, which is kind of a status report of the job strategy report that they put out at right after referral. There's a payment point there. The last two payment points mirror what is currently in our contracts, with a payment and placement after 3 days and a payment at 90 days. We've had some feedback from vendors about whether we should modify the requirement that the file is ready for closure after 90 days, given that some of these files could be open for a while in job coaching beyond that, but we're still taking feedback and still weighing what we're hearing. That's following the track straight down. If we go off to the left on it, we see a participant portfolio, and this is going to replace job prep. There's a one-time fee for this. It will include a master application, master resume, any generic interview prep that's needed, and it will replace, as I said, job prep. So later on in the process, if the vendor has to do more job prep, online applications, whatever, they're doing that as part of job placement. Now, on the lower left in the box that's disconnected there, we're seeing how the payment structure works out in comparison to the current contract. As you can see, for track 1 and 2, it's essentially the same. There's a $300 increase. We've been going for 5 years without an increase. I think this is reasonable. We're also getting feedback from a fair number of vendors that what we're paying is coming up short of what they need to keep their business going. The big change is in track 3. There's an extra $1,000 on top of that to compensate vendors for, again, that small number of clients that's going to need considerably more work. It should be pointed out that some of these clients will also be having discovery prior to being referred to our job placement services, and that'll be an extra $1,600 and either $40 or $1,680. So there's a significant increase in funding for vendors working with supported employment clients, given our increase here and what DD is. It's a work in progress with DD. We're doing discovery. It's early in the process. I know there's a lot of discontent with it, but we're going to keep working and make sure the process is refined and improved. This increase in money hopefully will create a market force for more job developers to enter the system, for current job developers to be able to hire more people on and to expand their business. We're also talking about a rural subsidy. I think we mentioned $500 upfront if the vendor is 70 miles or more away from where the client and the placement activity is taking place. We're also talking about some tweaks in this on a rapid placement fee if a person is placed out of assessment before entering the contract, and working on a placement fee if a person is placed out of an OJT. But this is essentially what we have come up with as a proposal to replace what we're working on right now. Sure. Do you want to talk about that, Joe, or do you want me to cover that? Yeah. Joe's going to cover a little bit more about track 3.
On track 3, the intent here really is, as Robert mentioned, to serve the folks that are sort of the most intensive need. We're thinking when we were looking at track 3 and were folks that were nonverbal, maybe had, flailing limbs that were quite distractive or had a hard time trying to intentionally be able to motor task. We were looking at folks that may, be headbangers or have spitting or biting. There are a number of successes in placements for folks that have that intensified need, but we recognize that it takes special placement that is not only customized by the type of job, but also pretty much a job creation. So the track 3, we have been thinking of developing a matrix that relates to employment factors, but since we serve a broad spectrum of folks, they will be functional limitations that are attached to significant barriers that need that intensive service for the additional money. We really think that this will incentivize more job developers to take on the level of clients that we see an increased need. We also think that it may be that we take a look at the matrix and say, would an ANA score, the Adult Needs Assessment score of a 5 to 7 for IDD folks, be part of the trigger with behavioral issues? We do recognize a lot of TBI clients need that extra intensity, as well as you may see for mental health, the folks that have come from PSRB or some of the SACU, the state-approved unit, have intensive needs that would fall in the track 3. So this is not the predominant group of folks that are coming through our door in supported customized placement, but we do want to offset additional funds for placements that we need to have that really intense customization. Thank you. And I believe Trina would like to say something now.
Hello, everyone. This is Trina Lee. I wanted to, first and foremost, before we open things up for questions, I wanted to encourage individuals to give us a lot of feedback. There's been a lot of time and effort that the group has really, and the work group has really spent on this effort, and knowing that using our lessons learned from the first go-around, we're trying to have a little bit more intense of a vetting process. And this is, as he probably said in the very beginning, one session of a multiple session approach. And we have more to come with our vendors tomorrow, and having a conversation at the SRC and also our stakeholder meeting. So I, applaud you for participating, number one. Number two, I challenge you to really help us. What are we missing, and what are the areas that we need to think about that we didn't cover? Knowing that this is not the training for the implementation, this is not the end-all, be-all. That's a whole other effort that will be going on. So thank you.
And now we're moving to Callie.
We are. Hi, this is Callie Roush. So we're going to pull up a list of definitions that we've been working on, and probably let Robert and Joe talk about that as well.
Nice handoff, Kelly.
Hey.
So what we're trying to do here, as Joe mentioned in the beginning on that slide about the new system, old system, current system, new system, is we're trying to get tighter definitions around the services so that it's not an argument client by client, job developer of do we need an assessment and what type of assessment and how many of these assessments do we need? Do we need more job prep and how many more hours? So what we've tried to do is define the different types of assessments more tightly. Where appropriate, and in most cases, we've put we're proposing a dollar limit, a flat fee for these services to create more equality across the state in terms of what folks receiving the services and what vendors are getting, and limiting the number of times these services can be used. So starting with the definitions here, we've got, on the top here, we've got the definitions of the first 3 tracks. Do we want to go over these one by one? No, let folks read them.
Yeah. Just let folks read them.
Yeah.
And comment.
We've got a definition down here of the job placement strategy report. For job development, we're trying to outline what is going to be in job development. Yeah. We're going to see who took the Evelyn Woods course here. We are watching your screens. Now we're seeing, can they scroll through them as they want? No, you're scrolling through for them. Okay.
Yeah. So this is Dan again. All of this material from today's presentation, the PowerPoint, the 2 workflows, and the list of definitions will be posted by Friday on the intranet, and we'll send out a link to everyone. And it appears that it's recording as well, so we'll also be able to get a copy of this PowerPoint up on the intranet as well. Can't guarantee that'll be done by Friday, but we do have someone from IT who's going to help us get that all set up. So this isn't going to be your only chance to read this stuff. We'll definitely get it out. We wanted to have an opportunity to do it through a presentation first so that we were able to explain things and answer questions as they came up. So I believe we're going to get to some definitions here in which Robert's going to want to actually explain some of them, especially once we get to the assessments. The targeted vocational assessment as well as the comprehensive assessment. I forget what we named it.
And we do, as Trina mentioned, we do want feedback on this. We've vetted this with the Job Placement Services Advisory Group twice. We rolled it out to internal partners, DHS, ODDS, Employment First, TANF, Developmental Disability Council, ORA. SRC is getting to look at today. We gave a brief overview to SRC prior. We ran it by branch managers. So we're getting feedback, and we are taking that and changing as we're taking your input and changing as we go. We've gotten some feedback about OJT and rapid placement that we're going to be incorporating into these definitions. So in assessments, we were getting a lot of disparity between vendors in terms of how assessments were being used. We were getting assessments occurring frequently during job placement. Generally, we're looking at assessment happening before referral to job placement services. We should know if there are questions that we need to answer via a community-based work assessment, targeted vocational assessment. We should be getting those answers before we send them to a job placement person. Occasionally, we're going to be looking for a job, and we say, well, that just doesn't work out. We thought this person could be a computer programmer, but it seems like they don't have the chops. Let's look at some other areas. So it's going to be some times where we need to make a change of course, and we are going to have to do an assessment after placements is started. But generally, we're looking at these services, the assessments occurring before placement starts. We're looking at limiting the number of them. We're looking at tighter definitions to make sure that we're not just kind of flailing around with folks out there in assessments, but that we've answered basic questions we can talking to the person individually and with team before we send them on assessment. We're limiting the amount of time the person can be on a community-based work assessment. I think we've got a number of hours there, and we're looking at number of weeks. It's down that bullet point towards the bottom. We're saying generally one CBWA. We've got exception processes all the way through because every time we came up with something, we had an exceptional example. So we are putting exception process in. Generally, branch manager approval. We're distinguishing, again, targeted Vocational assessment is being more specific and shorter, answering questions about a specific job, as opposed to CBWA, looking at more general areas on what supports does the person need, what type of work environments will the person succeed in. And we talked a lot about this, and that's why we have all these bullet points. It would be nice if we had one bullet point. And yeah, there is a limit on number of hours in a targeted vocational assessment too. That's listed up here. Trial work experience, as we know from the Rehab Act, is a pre-eligibility activity, only in those rare cases where we have real questions about whether the person can benefit from services.
And it may actually be gone under WIOA, depending on how we read it.
Personal and vocational adjustment. We've been seeing this used in various ways. Now we're looking at it as a training activity and as an activity that's getting a person ready for work in terms of creating awareness of behaviors that may interfere with job placement and success on the job, and strategies to improve those. We're having some flexibility about it being provided individually or in a group setting. In the case that it has to happen on the job, we'll do that. But generally, we're looking at the counselor as identifying the person needs this type of service, needs this training, and it's being provided before going out on the job. We want to make sure that the person, that we've resolved the rehab issues to the fullest extent possible before we're referring them to the job developer. So that's why we kind of outlined the system as we have it. We will be doing trainings on this, and we're also putting out to counselors if you feel like you need help with this. We've got branch managers, we've got program techs, we've got folks here to help us with it. So that looks like we have scrolled down through definitions. I think next on the hit parade is questions.
Yeah, so just like our WIOA webinars, if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the questions box and hit send. We'll be reading them here as they come in and getting answers to your questions if you have any, or comments. And we will get started as soon as we get some questions. So at this point, it looks like we explained everything so well that there are no questions.
No, there's a couple.
You guys need to use a larger font for your questions.
So the first question is back to the job placement strategies report. And the question is, what happens after 120 days? Are we giving the job developers another $500? Does the whole thing start over? And I'll let Robert jump in on that one.
No, that those 2 payment points are one-time only payment points. We are going to be requiring a report every month, and only the first one has that payment attached to it. We're kind of looking at it as working as we are now, but hopefully smarter, better. If job placement is dragging out, as you do now, you want to sit down with a client, with a job developer, try to brainstorm what's going wrong, what do we need to do differently. At some point, you might want to switch to a different vendor, but you're also going to want to reassess that job placement strategy report. Is there a problem with it? Did we misidentify things? Or maybe is it just that the job market is difficult for the clients? Limitations are fairly serious, and it's going to take a while. So you want to be assessing as you go along. If it does turn out that that job placement strategy seems like it's not working and we need a new one, we can ask for a new one. I believe we're saying, do we say that? I believe we said that we were not doing a payment for a second job placement strategy report. Yeah. We're sending it to a new vendor. If you've come to the end of the road, it looks like this vendor is just not working, we need to send it to a new vendor. We want to get the job placement strategy we have from the old vendor to the new vendor so they can see what was proposed and what wasn't working, but we would do with a new vendor, we would do a new job placement strategy report then, but that's the only time we'd be doing another one.
And before you would switch vendors, as Robert said, we would expect that you'd be having a meeting with the current vendor to really search out the issues and figure out where you truly stand. And then if it isn't working, that's when you would switch.
Yeah.
We've got a couple other questions here. Several questions about printing the PowerPoint presentation or getting a copy of the definitions. And I'll go back this afternoon when we get done and email those out to all staff so we don't have to wait for the intranet to catch up with us on Friday. So you will have those probably 20 minutes after our webinar ends. Another question we have out there is job coaching going to be included in the job placement contract?
So we have job coaching as a definition. What we decided this time, instead of trying on our own make a decision on what's in the contract, what isn't in the contract, is that contracts asked us to list the services that we felt were needed for this overall activity of getting people a job through third-party assistance. So what we're doing is we're giving definitions to them of what we want, the parameters that we're seeing around the amount of time and the payment structure, and then we're letting them determine what is the word? I guess the word is instrument they use. What's the best instrument for delivering the service? So job coaching we're still looking at as an hourly activity. We did see a couple states that had it as a flat fee, but to me that really doesn't make sense given the wide variance in the amount of time that different folks have. So it'll still be hourly. Whether it is in the contract or outside the contract, it's going to be kind of a non-issue. The client doesn't, it's not going to really matter to the client. For us, it's just kind of how it is paid. But it is going to be defined in the contract. We will have a single point person you can go to for all these services. And it's really just a matter of how things are paid in terms of what is technically in the contract and what isn't in the contract. And I don't know, Cal, if you can address that any better than I can.
It will really depend on what the procurement tool looks like, so the contract looks like, yeah.
Yeah.
Robert.
Procurement tool, that is not an instrument. It's a procurement tool.
Well, the procurement tool.
Tool, not an instrument tool.
I do want to add, it'll look very much like what we're used to, and counselors can then judge how many hours needed for job coaching. With the IDD clients, it's a little bit slightly different in the fact that you know that there's different tiers that a client falls in related to their scores on the K plan, and so therefore ours is a flat, rate per hour, which the ODDS payment may actually fall a little higher than ours on some clients and a little lower on other clients. So I think part of that is that for most clients, they actually might fall a little higher than what we paid, which may actually encourage folks to go on to ODDS services a little faster once the site is stabilized. But we weren't able to match their exact rates because their rates are fixed in a rebar situation. Ours are right there, fairly on the high end, not completely as high as some clients might receive for intensive services for an ODDS.
So another question here. For a person starting in track 2, and we identify that their needs are a little more than we originally thought, can we move to track 3?
I think in that case you could talk to your branch manager about that. It's not. There was one proposal that it would be geared towards how long it takes a job placement person to place that person. We decided to go against that. We're looking at a system that's going to incentivize rapid placement rather than something that's going to reward slower placement. But you don't always, hopefully you're going to have enough information. You're going to get to know the client enough beforehand to have that information. But if it turns out that we made the call wrong, definitely talk to your branch manager and about changing the track.
Got a question here about who's going to win the Stanley Cup. Thank you, Matt Balkwell. I believe it's going to be the St. Louis Blues.
Probably the Bruins, but
No,
partisanship here, yeah.
How about repeater placements, multiple job placements? Are we dealing with them the same way as we currently do?
So the current one was that the first placement we pay at 3 days after placement. Second placement, the person loses the job. We're saying, job developer, go back, make sure you've addressed all these issues that cause the person to lose the first job. Wait till 30 days to get the placement. And then if they lose that job, we're not going to pay placement again. We're only going to pay for retention. I think we're going to keep that, as we talked about, we're going to keep that current system.
We have not heard any negative from our staff about that, so we're keeping that the same.
With the targeted vocational assessment, if a placement is offered, does the vendor get a flat fee and a placement?
Can you read that again?
Yeah. With a targeted vocational assessment, if a placement is offered, does the vendor get a flat fee and a placement fee?
So the targeted vocational assessment and the CBWA we're looking at as occurring before we do the referral and get the job placement strategy. For a job that happens out of those, we're going to have to look at how we're going to reward that as a rapid job placement fee. And one lesson we're getting from Office of Contracts and Procurement is to leave our, puritanical mindset of you have to work hard for your money or you don't get your money, and look at a system that instead rewards rapid placement. Even if it looks like the person hasn't done, the vendor hasn't done a lot of work, if the work they're doing is resulting in rapid placement, you want to reward that rather than penalize that. So if we're having an assessment and the person is placed in a job, what we've done right now, I know there's been a lot of variance about this around the state, but for assessments that are happening before there's a proposal accepted, there's no proposal, so there's no placement fee, but the vendor can write a proposal for retention. We pay a retention fee. So, in some ways that seems fair, but what we're advised to do is to somehow reward, find a way to reward a placement that comes out of an assessment because it's saving everybody a lot of grief. So in those cases, what we decided we need to do is, instead of ignoring the reason for the assessment, we need to follow through in the assessment. You do an assessment because you have some questions that you can't answer otherwise, and you have a list of concerns you give to the assessment vendor. You want the answers to these questions. How is the person's behavior on the job? Can they show up on time? Can they stay on task? What is their interpersonal actions like on the job? If you get a job offer, we don't just say, oh, we don't need those answers anymore. There may just be a unique chemistry between the employer and the client, but those are still questions that are going to be present a couple weeks down the line. I think that's why we see so many assessment-driven placements don't turn into long-term jobs, because we kind of threw out all those questions. So what we're going to ask for is that the vendor completes the assessment, answers those questions, but we're going to reward, in some degree, which we haven't figured out yet, an extra fee for that placement. Someone wrote thank you on that. I love that. I don't know who wrote that. It was probably Dan or Callie just put that in there. And actually, I don't know who's in the Stanley Cup playoffs this year, actually. I do know who won the Masters, though.
Robert, I think you just answered this, but I'm just going to go ahead and ask it again because it did come back up. If a TVA becomes a job developed site, is there a job offer? If there is a job offer, does the vendor get a placement fee after the plan has been developed? Basically answered.
Yeah, I basically answered that. And we haven't figured out if it's going to be the same placement fee or if there's going to be a placement fee but a reduced one, but there will be some reward for the vendor on that one. Calgary, see, Calgary is up there as winning the Stanley Cup.
What about the vendors that hire clients within the larger organization when the job developer does not have hiring authority, like Goodwill? Each store hires as a separate entity. Could there be a modified payment system or one-time payment?
And that's a question that's come up over and over again. I think, in the original contract, we didn't have any language about this. We saw some abuse where some vendors were hiring clients for positions within their firm, shredding papers next to the job developer, that turned out not to be good placements. And what we realized is that we were dangling all these big, placement fees and retention fees in front of the job developer, and it was just not really fair. But we saw that with the rule that we put to curb that practice, there were some other practices that seemed like we were eliminating that we should still allow. And I think one of them was LCC, where LCC has an arm that does job placement that has nothing to do really with the landscaping service there, with the kitchen there, with other aspects of it. And we were denying folks good jobs, and the vendor really had to do some work there. So I think we need to revisit this. Maybe we'll have some structure where placements by vendors need to be reviewed by the job developer, by the branch manager, the field service manager, to make sure that it looks like it's in everyone's best interest. But I think we need some relaxing on that rule, but we haven't totally ironed that out yet.
Okay, a question about personal vocational adjustment training. There are times when a client has been placed in a job and they start having behavior issues that would warrant hiring a behavior specialist. I think we would want to have an exception here.
Sure. You want to take that one, Joe?
Well, we do want to include this as a service so that you can have additional supports available to you. We do have different systems also that from ODDS and mental health that can give you added behavioral specialist supports. So I don't want us to overlook that we do have some talents from other departments in this area, but you will be able to hire a behavioral specialist under personal vocational adjustment and be able to strategize the techniques that you want. You will see in the definition that it really reflects strategies and a report afterwards as the client's being followed as to how the progress is occurring. It is a short-term service, so it's not extended for long periods of time, but as you work through the job development process, it's available to you.
So a lot of the system we put down to try to encourage counselors to work more with clients on the front end. There are going to be times when you do all your best work and there's still surprises that come up after the person's on the job. But what we're trying to do is to discourage getting a client at your desk and looking at them saying, oh my God, I've got no idea what to do here. Let's get a job developer in to solve all of life's problems. And then, that's where you do get, if you either get a conflict of interest or an appearance of conflict of interest, and you get, I've seen files where the job developer is writing the show, when they're writing in all kinds of services the person needs. That's generally the job of the counselor. I admit I was guilty as a counselor and getting a client that I had no idea what to do with and brought a job developer and said, can you fix this person for me? That's what we want to be steering away from. But, as you say, Tracy, there's going to be times when there's stuff that you didn't see, behaviors that don't show up until you're on a particular type of job. I had no idea that this person smashes glass whenever they see it. We never had them around a lot of glass, and now on a job they are doing it. We need to do something about that behavior.
So the job proposal under the current contract and the job strategy seem to be different vocabulary and more money for the same thing. How are they different? And the job proposal did not work in the past. How is this going to be more efficient?
Well, two things we're seeing about contracts is one is that you have to write them better, and the second is that you have to monitor them better. And I think we didn't have the staff to monitor the first one. It is replacing that proposal. The one way in that it differs is that half of the report should be focused on the client and half of the report should be focused on the job placement strategy. The prior proposal was just the strategy on how you're going to get this person to work. This one should have equal weight in it to what are the unique aspects of this client that is going to fit in with the job situation. So what's the unique job that this person is able to be successful in? So hopefully that we will monitor that and make sure that the job developer is spending time with the with the client. We may have to define it better, put in more language there about the expectation that the job developer is spending time with the client, not only in the office, but in community settings, getting to know, in the cases that the family is going to be a big part of the equation in terms of what jobs will work out, what won't work out, that they're engaging the family also. Originally, we had more money actually in that place, but we decided to put half of it, part of it, further along in the process after they have a month to try that out.
And hopefully this is one of the distinguishing factors that may be different from the first rollout or what we've had to where we're going in the future. In all fairness to vendors, we did emphasize with, we went straight to job placement, so there wasn't this money, as Robert described. We put more money up front so that there can be sort of a balance between how much time and when a vendor can spend with client and family to get to know them, and then when they go out and hit the streets and really work with the employer. So we're hoping that this is an improved system for many reasons.
So with so many possible Track 3 clients entering our system due to the executive order, will counselors' budgets and or spending limits increase?
We're hoping that it's not going to be a huge number of clients in Track 3. And I don't know if we've broken down the numbers yet, kind of what we're looking at, but we're looking at most of your supported employment clients are going to be in Track 2 when it's going to be the exceptional case, whether it's 10%, 15%, 20% are going to be in Track 3. We may have to look at spending limits. We did look at that with the last contract when we increased spending limits, your spending authority rather, because we're seeing that, we have that $5,000 limit for a plan needing branch manager approval, that you write in job placement services and not a whole lot else, and you're already over $5,000. In terms of money in our general budgets, we are not seeing more now. We're hoping that there's some way we can get more money. The executive order is only one of many financial strains on the system right now. Workforce investment, the Renewal Rehab Act of the Workforce is one other one that's going to potentially be putting a financial strain on us.
And I think by identifying those that are in a Track 3, it probably will help us redistribute money if you have a counselor that does fall with several Track 3 clients. I think it'll be easier for us to spot that and add money to your budget in that case. Like Robert said, we're hoping the predominant numbers are not in Track 3. They really should be in Track 2.
In terms of finances, what we looked at last, when we're looking at the money spent on clients up to this, we're seeing that, it appeared to me that vendors were not being compensated for working with clients that took so much more time. And so there was a lot of creative billing going on in terms of multiple assessments. And we saw files with seven CBWAs happening in a year, all billed for separately in addition to what the placement money was. So I think we may see some increase in cost on the system, but I think there's going to be some places where we're containing cost and trying to be more upfront about saying these clients are going to pay more, let's just compensate for that and not have to have folks find ways to bill to make it work for them.
I want to apologize to everybody for moving the phone around. Apparently that's horrible on your end, so we'll try not to do that anymore. We're just stuck with one speaker in this room. How does the portfolio compare with the product we hope to get from discovery or person-centered planning? I anticipate overlap. Do you?
Well, I think, that it's off to the side. The portfolio is off to the side because you're not going to need it on everybody. I'd say the portfolio is not going to be nearly as extensive as the discovery report or person-centered plan. It's more kind of a master resume, master application, some brief interviewing skills. But in the case of a person that comes with those materials, we don't need them. There might be someone that comes from discovery and they've got a great document in terms of the real specific conditions for this client's success and where we might look for them, but there's no master application, and we still need that. There might be other clients that we can send to WorkSource and go to a provider there and get an application and a resume. We're not going to need this. But we thought we needed to include this service. The money in it maybe isn't enough to fully compensate vendors, but there's some money in there, and there's a limit on it because we're also seeing, what to me looked like some abuses. I saw plans where counsel would turn in a plan and they would put in the first 8 months of the plan, there would be 8 hours of job prep a month, and it was like, well, how do you know that in 6 months this person's going to need 8 hours of job prep? So I think there was, again, another way of billing to compensate for the fact that we were maybe underfunding the whole service. Joe, do you have something to add now?
Yeah, the other thing that I think that will be nice is that if you are in need and use the participant portfolio, it will be that each client would walk out then with a full portfolio if you don't have it from Discovery or WorkSource. So this can also include like a video resume if needed for folks that are, different intensified services.
Just a second, I'll come up with another question here.
I did want to mention about the mental health system. When we look at the IPS programs or mental health, you've got the employment specialists, as you know, and these clients would be generally in track 2. We did discuss the fact that we still will allow and have the referral process, because what I think we're finding when we talk to both the counselors as well as the mental health specialists is that oftentimes the information between the two agencies isn't really complete at the beginning. So the referral part is still going to be an in-person meeting so that you can really, whichever partner starts first, can truly inform the next partner. The other part about it is when we have job strategies and the job strategy review and reports, that we will be helping our mental health counselors and employment specialists there with some upfront money as they go around the community. I think one of the confusing parts that has occurred, particularly in mental health, but also can be with other job vendors, is when the client themselves chooses not to disclose that they have a disability with the employer, and then a job placement occurs. And then there seems to be some wrangling potentially there between the counselor and the employment specialist, or the counselor and a job developer vendor as to, did you really place that person? One of the conversation points we've had as a committee is that, and it was actually brought up by the mental health employment specialist, to say, look, even if we want to honor the client's right to not disclose they have a disability to the employer, we still will have shown on our job tracking logs that we've been preparing this client, as well as we've been providing leads to the clients and working to find the right type of appropriate employer. So they should show, any counselor can ask us, and we can show them our job log leads to reflect that we've actually been working with this person, and in the fact with that particular employer. There is a disclosure issue. The same should be true with a job developer, because if the client doesn't wish to disclose, but the job developer clearly has been in contact with that employer and preparing that individual to go in, there's merits to pay. So I thought that was an important part of the conversation. Now, if there's nothing in the logs, then, and there's no reference to employers, then we don't pay.
And I think that would be outlined in the job placement, job strategy placement, job strategy report at the front end on how they were going to work with that. So you could look and see if there was conversation about that. The other thing, going back to that question about how are we going to make sure that these the job strategy report is better than the proposals without getting is, some of it's going to be up to the counselors. If you're getting something that is not, that's just cut and paste, that isn't worth the money you're paying for, you don't pay for it. So some of it's going to be that, this is not just an automatic payment point. On this one really should reflect work done towards getting that report out.
All right, moving on to another question. Can you explain career exploration activities? Is there any limitation to how much can be spent?
So this you need to spend according to what you need to identify your vocational goal. And, you want to do a good job here. I think we tend to kind of shortchange this and just kind of latch onto a goal. You see a client that looks like it's really hard. Someone comes up with an idea and say, "Yeah, let's try that one." I think I think this is money well spent. I think this is time well spent. I think you should put the time into doing this to the extent that you can, that you and the client can do it on your own. That you can refer them out to do some exploration. Great. For the folks that can't do that, IDD, mental health clients maybe that don't have the capacity to interact with an employer to set up an informational interview, pay for it. I think it's, the more dangerous outcome is that you don't do this, you come up with a goal that maybe isn't well thought out, you spend a lot of money on getting the person into that job, and after 30 days they say, well, this isn't what I thought that was going to be about. Better to do a job shadow informational interview on the front end, get the person interested and excited about it. It's probably going to make the job placement process a lot easier.
All right, and here's one for Joe, because I know Joe did a lot of research on this. Is there any other state rehab program paying as much as Oregon VR for job development?
Yeah, there are a couple of the states. However, the interesting part is really we are kind of pretty much the first in the nation to look at a Track 3. There are a couple of other states that pay just a little bit more for their entire system. They have reported to us that it has frequently put them in an order of selection and that they are readjusting down, and that's not a fun place to be. We're in a situation where we're adjusting up with our prices, and we also are adding a Track 3. There's 2 other states that are considering different payment points for more intensive work, but have never developed a full Track 3. So I think we're in a good position.
And this, we're really making the best guess we can, but it's still kind of a guess on how this is going to impact us financially. It's not a big increase in money. If you look at Track 1 and 2, it's just $300. Track 3, it is an extra $1,000. That is a big increase. But we're also limiting the number of assessments we're doing. We're trying to be smarter about that. I think the biggest way this is going to cost more is that it's moving money up front. So for folks that are not successfully placed, we're still going to be spending some more money. It's going to require you as counselors to be, to be a little more judicious in terms of referring folks out, who you refer them to, making sure that the person is really ready to go on it before we send them out to a job developer. We are taking some of the risk back from the vendors right now, and to me it seems fair. When we kind of did a projection on it, it looked like it was going to cost more to do it this way. A lot because we're moving the money, not because we're paying more per client, but because we're moving the money forward.
And we are interested in providing the rural subsidy for tanks of gas to allow increased job capacity in areas that are small towns that are more than 70 miles away. So we're hoping that we can change our MQs for job developers and job coaching as part of this process and increase our capacity, particularly in rural areas.
All right. Can PVA be provided by someone who is not a contracted job developer? For example, a skills trainer or a counselor?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
So we're going, we're looking at the credentials, and that one there, that's kind of, you see PBA really happening before the job, before the person gets into the job placement track. So that would be, provided by someone that wouldn't necessarily need to be credentialed in there. You could also utilize that person after they were in job placement services if you determine the need later at that point. We're also looking at a way of having qualifications and credentials. They're going to be different for job coaches and job developers, and we are looking at contracts, developing a contract for us that contractors could sign up to provide one or the other service, or provide some services and not others. Maybe have some folks on staff that had the credentials to be the job coach but not job developer, or to do part of the service and not the other. So we're looking at tightening up on the credentials but having flexibility for providers.
And I think for the PBA, we have also talked about wanting to expand our capacity for the number of really good credentialed folks that come with great backgrounds around doing vocational adjustments and be able to share a lot more resources around the state for vendors that want to work with us in this way.
Yeah. I think we tend to, if you think about it, it's a very different skill set than the job developer who's doing the marketing to the employer. And this is the person that's knowing the disability and knowing the interventions and the new behavioral strategies. So it would likely be a different set of qualifications and potentially different people.
Along those same lines, are job coaches going to need some kind of certification?
So we're going to have something for job coaches, yeah. One thing that's in the executive order that does apply to us is about credentialing for and minimum and competency-based standards for job coaches and job developers. So we're looking at making sure that we're aligned with the executive order. This isn't all about just serving DD, but DD is one population this has to align with, just like we have to align with mental health. So there will be some credentialing for job coaches. There's going to be some training for job coaches also. There's money that comes through Employment First for doing training. There's been training ongoing, and hopefully it's going to be more. What we're looking at with the qualifications, the MQs, is we're looking at trying to set the bar so as many folks can get in the front door and be signed up as possible, and then providing training and having a time limit on when folks have to get the training. It may not be, the optimal approach. It's best everyone fully trained up beforehand, but I just don't think we can get capacity, especially in rural areas, if we say we have this high bar that people have to go through this year of training before they can start billing us. It's just not going to happen. So we're looking at making sure that people have some level of competency coming in, but setting a system so we can get as many people in the front door as possible, and then having some good standards for training, including continuing education credits, so that we make sure that we've got people that are as skilled as possible doing the service.
And we also recognize that some vendors would prefer to do track one clients particularly, and so we will have MQs that allow a vendor to sign up, a job developer or a job coach to sign up, but then if they want to do the supported employment side, then they may have an APSE or an ANCHOR take a test to show that they can do the clients in supported employment. So somebody's not restricted. They can be a job developer. If you want to be a job developer for supported or customized job development, there's another requirement that relates to those specific skill sets, as Robert's talking about, the core competencies.
Yeah.
And it will be given, we've been looking at a period of a year that somebody could maybe take the APSE exam that could show that they have those kind of competencies.
All right. The vocational profiles we get from Discovery typically identify 3 separate vocational themes. Is there any flexibility built into the system for us to pay for successful job placement that match one of those 3 themes identified in discovery, but not in the IPE?
So I think if you're getting discovery back and it's identifying these three themes, you've got something different in the IPE, you're going to have to align those. So you're going to need to do I realize to change the plan goal, you have to do a new plan. But you don't want to be going in two directions at once. You want to be looking at, so you put some reasoning, some thoughts, some assessment into what the goal is in the IPE. There's also been work put into what's come back in the discovery. So you're going to need to look at those and say, what's going on here? Why are they different? What's the more accurate information? Is there some common ground? How can I work with these two? But you're going to want to, apart from payment structure, you want to get alignment on those.
All right, looks like I passed up a few questions and can't get them back. So if we have not answered your question, please go ahead and send them back in.
So there was one about payments for CVWAs, for all the stuff that was defined, and we've got some tentative ones there. We're mainly looking at, kind of what offices are doing well with those, that have set some parameters already, and that have, good feedback from their vendors on them. So we've got some proposals on those, but we don't have them out now. If you've got suggestions on those, or what's working for you, send them in.
Does VR do criminal background checks on vendors?
Yes, we do.
Yes, all vendors.
Not all vendors, actually. For job placement vendors, yes. Job coaches, we do. Tutors, qualified business experts. I think medical consultants. So for the purpose of today, yes, we will do background checks on any of our contracted vendors.
Will Orca be updated in time for the new services for the new service contract?
Plan? That is the plan.
That's the plan.
We're still in certain phases of this project, and that's one of them, is coordinating the Orca changes.
We did, we had an original rollout date of July 1 for this new contract because the old contracts were largely running out June 30th. And we realized that if we wanted to be serious about getting feedback, we need to roll it back. So the proposed start date now is October 1, and that will give some more time for there's a lot of other pieces left to be done. There's the Orca piece. There's 1,000 different reforms, reports. Contract administration.
Quality assurance. Got a lot to do.
We would like to come out with another desk reference guide to teach and train whatever the final is after we receive everyone's input and finalize every detail.
So we've been using some lingo and some acronyms without explaining them. So one of the questions we got, Robert, was what is a PVA, or what is PVA?
Personal and vocational adjustment. So that's if a person needs some change in behavior to fit a job. So a person needs some adjustment. Person's behavior isn't going to get in the way. Probably has in the past, is anticipating the future of getting in the way of being successful on a job, and needs to have some awareness developed about what those behaviors are and some strategies on how to change those behaviors. Learning triggers that are going to set them off, learning behaviors they may not be aware of that will jeopardize a job.
One of the frequent examples I think of is oftentimes with developmental disability, person may not realize that they don't run up and hug the employer every day. I mean, those kind of things, or different types of training that make the work environment better understood for the client, and so that there's less of an adjustment the first day of the job, and also they're followed oftentimes on the job for a short period of time to make sure that everything's working in the best way.
And those definitions, I guess we don't have the definitions in front of them right now, right?
No, they don't.
You'll begin the definitions that will define targeted vocational assessment, comprehensive work assessment, personal vocational adjustment.
The next question, is there a plan for increasing the number of trainings for job developers and job coaches in rural areas?
Yes, there is, and I know Cheryl has done increased trainings in rural areas. Cheryl's revisited rural areas on a regular basis to keep folks moving along in professional development. There is movement afoot with Employment First team that has money to provide increased training for job developers and job coaches to get them the EOP2 training, and also to get them training towards APSI and ACRE certification and in the core competency. So in the executive order it says July. The competencies already have to be developed, which they have been, but they are, everyone has to be showing those by July 1, 2016. So we have a little bit of time to roll all those out, and there is funding for that, largely through Employment First.
The other thing you might want to be interested to know is ODDS has, Employment First, has given 14 private vendors additional money to expand so that the capacity of job developers increases. Additionally, they provided contracts for 25 sheltered workshop vendors to move into an employment, competitive-based employment unit for placement. So we should see, along with what our capacity increases are, as well as ODDS's, we're hoping to add new vendors and specific to a lot of populations that we're seeing some increases in.
And just as we're putting in qualifications for our vendors so that they will align with ODDS, ODDS is also putting in stipulations on their vendors so that they will become VR vendors, so that when we're increasing capacity on one side, we're increasing it for both agencies.
And currently, right now, the average is we're getting about 5 to 7 new vendor applications per week. So we are seeing some increases in the number of vendors that are coming forward. Now, that may be that they're starting out companies that you'll give them 1 or 2 clients to see how they do, but we are increasing that, and we're looking at expediting how to get those folks their contracts.
Will we be getting more training with the new services contract as it gets closer to implementation?
Yes, yeah, we'll go around the state and do a training on it just as we did on the current contract as it gets closer to it. It has to go, contracts have to do a bunch of work to with this. I think they needed a couple months lead time, so we need to wait until it goes through contracts to make sure we're training on the right thing. But my guess is that we would be training, when do we think, July and August, or August and September?
I'm guessing August and September.
August and September, yeah.
After the job strategy review and we determine that a new job strategy report is needed, will we be paying for another report?
So you get the job strategy report, the first one, and you pay. First you review it, you critically look at it. Does it look good? Does it not look good? If there's stuff in there that doesn't look like it's going to apply to you, have the job developer amend it before you accept and pay for it. Then after a month of trying it, you're going to have another meeting, hopefully with the vendor, or at least get a report back from them saying what worked in that strategy proposal, what didn't. You'll want them to adjust it depending on what they found out in that month, but you won't pay for it again. What we said before is the only time you would do that is if you went 6, 9 months down the road, sometime with this vendor, it wasn't working out, you realized, after repeated tries, revisions, all that, you needed to change vendors. You go to a new vendor, you're not going to have them follow the old vendor's strategy. It didn't work for one, so you would do a new one in that case, but that's only with switching vendors. If you go down the road 3, 4, 5 months and it's not working out, and you sit down with a job developer and say, what's wrong there? And they say, oh my God, I missed this big point. I'm going to need to rewrite that. Good, go ahead, rewrite it, but we wouldn't pay for a new one.
Can we see an example of a job strategy report?
As soon as what's written.
We are actually in the process of putting a work group together to review all the forms that will be related to the new contract. So we don't have those ready yet, but we will send them out for feedback once they're ready to go. And we're hoping to have them drafted by late May, early June. So we're working pretty quick because we need to make sure everything matches up.
And that's a really good suggestion. I think as part of the training on all those forms, what we have is not just give you the blank form, but have an example, a prototype of a good report, so you have something to match it against. So you're not guessing what should this look like.
And if you're interested in being on that work group, get a hold of Sean Mole. He's looking for a couple of counselors, a couple of branch managers,
Spell his name.
It's Sean, S-E-A-N, last name Mole, M-O-L-E. He's going to facilitate that group for me.
And if you can't remember that, just email any one of us and we'll get it to Sean. So, question here, what are you going to do to help VRC provide the additional information to our vendors?
So some of this is just going back to basics on rehab, on working with the client, asking those second, third level questions. I want a job. Well, let's look at what does that mean to you? What does going to a job look like? What would you have to do different tomorrow if you're going to a job other than what you're doing today? Getting in members of the team, if it's a person that can't articulate well, getting in a parent, a teacher, PA, whatever. What does this person do well? What do they do at home? What do they like to do? Any assessments, vocational testing is great. A lot of offices have vocational testing in the office. Sending folks out on an informational interview. The person's not sure what they want to do. Going through a bunch of vocational opposites. Do you like to work indoors or outdoors? Do you like to work in a clean environment or a messy environment? Do you like to, use your hands, or do you like to use your mind? Do you like to work with, ideas? Just going through those, just kind of those basic parts of vocational counseling and rehab, and coming up with the best information you can, and then doing some testing, sending the person out on informational interviews, job shadows, whatever. It's work, but that's what we should be trained in doing with clients. We should be trained in being specialists in disability and in employment. So we should know those two ends and work with a client and put that knowledge set together.
And we will be training vendors as well as, everybody on the final details, and provide reference books to vendors as well. So we have a common platform and language to work with our client flow, hopefully throughout the rehab process, but whose roles will go in and how do we blend our respective works to get the job.
But you're right, a lot of it, we roll it out right now, but most of it's in the follow-up in monitoring and seeing where there's some holes in people's skills and going out and doing training. We've got Patrick working on the counselor training for new counselors coming in. After that, he's going to be working on modules for kind of advanced training, as we're seeing that we have areas that, where we've got a skill, it's kind of common thing, we've got a skill deficit in this area across the state, or there's a, commonality there, addressing that with some training modules.
Can we address the issue of the client being placed out of the community-based work assessment, not yet in plan, and paying a placement fee when we know long-term supports are not yet established and the client is actually not ready to be put into plan yet?
With supported employment, what our rules say, we with all the changes with executive order, all that coming down, we still have to follow what's in our rules. Says that if the person is a supported employment client, we can't put them in plan until we've either identified the source of the supports, or we have a reasonable belief that we can identify those sources of the support in the course of the plan unfolding. So if you think that you can identify the supports, definitely put them into plan. We are going to come up with some payment structures, we said, for folks that are placed out of assessment. You'd have to get the plan together, obviously, quite quickly. Supports is another issue. The reason for that is obvious. You don't want to get a person 3-4 months on a job, everything's going great, and there's no possibility of ongoing supports, and the person has a failed job experience and comes out worse than when they started. We don't want that.
Do voc rehab counselors have the authority to reject job strategy reports and refuse payment?
Yes, yes, yes. And you want to look at these critically. What I'd say probably is to give it back and say, this is what is lacking. I don't see anything here showing that you worked with this client to know where they're going to succeed and where not. So give constructive criticism back, hand it back, and ask for revision.
Along those same lines, on all reports, are there going to be specific expectations required?
Joe, do you have something to add on that last one?
Yes, I just wanted to say I think that if we, are in a position of thinking of rejecting something, I do think it's really important to have a direct conversation with the vendor, preferably a meeting, so that you could really ask the questions to make sure, is it something really that it wasn't done, or something that seems to be misunderstood, or something that really just didn't happen to be put right in the report itself. So I just wanted to comment that I think by our best practices, if something's not in a job strategy report, or even before that, even in a job strategies section, then have that conversation with our partner as a vendor.
Definitely, yeah. You want to be educating and developing the relationship rather than alienating the person. In terms of the specifics that we're going to require, I think we haven't worked out the form, so we haven't worked that out yet. But the more we can be specific, the better. The hard thing with doing a lot of this is that we want to be really defined, because it was just kind of so loose what it kind of evolved around assessments over the past few years. But we don't want to be so, when we're dealing with real people and real situations, and as we know, every client's different, every situation's different. We don't want to define it so well as to come up with something that's inflexible and unworkable.
And I think also, when I think about the real world, we know that we head down one vocational track, as a goal, but it could be that some other opportunity comes up that the job developer seeks. And so you might have a job strategies plan, and suddenly a new opportunity comes up. So I would assume the job developer would come forward to the VR counselor and identify that there's an additional opportunity, and then the client's brought in, and if that's something that's even better than had been planned previously, we can adjust our plans to amend and do a new plan to fit what potentially a new goal is. So I think we both have to stay flexible. Yeah. As counselors, we have to stay flexible, as well as job developers, to try and meet the market, as long as it's a good fit in the end for the client.
An email from David Rotacco came out this morning that states VR will discontinue soliciting and accepting a new request to become a job placement vendor as of April 5th. Can you address how long this will be in place?
So the reasoning behind that is we're at within 5 months of our contract being expiring. And then with the plans, of course, to start a new contract October 1st. So we were working with the state procurement office and working with Cheryl and kind of transferring some of these duties and preparing for the October 1st rollout. The contracting office really prefers not to write contracts for anything less than 6 months because of the amount of resources and money it costs to do that. So it was really recommended that we pick a date, and we did that with Cheryl, and we picked April 5th to stop accepting applications, and then the solicitation is expected to come out this summer. So that's when our new vendors, or all of our vendors right now who have contracts, are going to have to reapply again. So they would also be doing double work. If they're sending in an application in June for a 2-month contract, they're going to be doing that all over again in June or July or August anyway. So we kind of got to that point where we decided to pick that date and stop accepting applications and kind of do the best we can with what we have for the next few months, and then start fresh October 1st and get everybody re-signed and hopefully bring in some new folks and start. We can still advertise, spread the word, let folks know we're preparing to come in as vendors, that they can do that in the summer, and then October 1st will get started.
we'll have to, and this is Trina Lee speaking, we'll have to have some conversation with the Developmental Disability Program because I know that they have a requirement for some of their vendors to be a co-vendor with us by the end of the, was it June or July?
Yeah.
So we'll need to have some conversation, excuse me, and try to determine how we can, since we now have this other issue facing us, try to extend that or whatnot. So there's more to come on the DD co-provider. So.
Yeah, and I know there was kind of a little flurry of emails about that after that came out this morning. I think we need to have another conversation about maybe tomorrow in exec and see if there's anything we can do. Because there is those two competing forces coming. One is it's a lot of extra work for contract, but there's the other issue of we really are at a critical breaking point with regard to capacity. And anytime as we know with order of selection, anytime you stop the flow, it's hard to get it going again. This time with vendors, that time with clients. So stay tuned.
When we initiate this contract, are we rolling existing clients into the new formula as well?
Well, we're going to have to look at that and I know we had that transition phase when we went to this contract before. When we started it, we had people that were already in job development, so we're going to have to look at how to do that transition phase. That's a whole other issue we haven't really talked about yet, but we're going to have a process there for how to do the transfer over.
My guess is that the clients that were in this system will play out and we'll start it at a certain date, a new system for all new clients. That's what we've generally done so that it doesn't create chaos with all the AFP systems, but we haven't really, in fairness, as Robert mentioned, we haven't really had that conversation, but that's in general how we've operated in the past.
And I think contracts will probably have something to say about
Yes.
that because there's just some legal
Right.
issues there that we
Right.
have to go by. Yeah.
Right.
So clarification question on the contracting issue. Can people still apply to be a vendor? So can they still apply to be a job coach or provide job prep? That stopped as well.
I would think vendor would be okay, but I think it's just the job placement contract. But again, we're going to have another discussion on that just to make sure that everything's thought out and operating optimally on that one.
Will each current job placement contractor be automatically renewed if they apply? Or will VR deny any current ones, as there are probably some who are not meeting performance expectations?
Kelly, do you have any?
Well, it'll be based on an application process, so it won't be based on performance measures. If they meet the application standards, they will get a contract. If they're not performing, I think our hope is that they won't be utilized. If you're not getting what you need, if they're not serving your clients well, don't utilize them. And if they're not getting utilized, most likely they'll fall out of the system on their own.
Are there timelines in the process between referral and the job strategies report?
We did have some. We did have a timeline in that. It was pretty short. Was it like 2 weeks or 3 weeks or? And we wanted to make sure that vendors weren't just sitting on the referral and slowing down the process. I don't have the definition in front of me, but
I think what we said, although we don't have that in front of us, I think we said that the job strategy section needed to be developed within 30 days. That allowed the vendor to that is a job developer to also, or employment specialist, to also get to know the client a little bit and develop, up to. But we did have a point that we felt that we needed to have the job strategies outlined so that the counselor and the client would then know what to do and progress ahead.
And hopefully the client should be involved at that point. The vendor should be meeting with them. So it's not just kind of a waiting for the next step and waiting for the next thing to happen. At that point, there should be activities between the client and the job developer. And that's what's different about this one in the proposal. Where in the current contract, the job developer and the client meet at the referral, and then the job developer goes away and develops that proposal. Here, there should be activity between the client and the job developer in that interim.
We're just going to do a couple more questions here and then tie things up. Is there a plan to be more flexible with job goals, such as job characteristics, rather than specific job or career type as we are using now?
And you know, we tried doing that, and we were told that we were led to believe that that could happen. We've been training on that. We're looking at writing plans that will incorporate characteristics. Kind of the bottom line is that whatever we put in ORCA, we can put in, anything in the whole wide universe. On the back end of ORCA for RSA, it has to match up to a specific job goal. So
we eventually have to get to a job goal.
Yeah.
We can start with job characteristics, but we do have to end with some specific job goal that matches for ORCA.
Yeah, we're going to have to work on that because, as we know, with the DD clients, it's not always that they want to be this specific goal. A lot of times it is about characteristics. They want a uniform, they want to be inside, they want a set schedule, and they want, whatever, limited social contact or a lot of it. So we're going to have to work on how we do that. I hate to have it be a system where we're doing plan revisions, but from what I'm hearing from RSA that they're fine with plan revisions, and over again, it shows that we're working with the client. It shows that our system is organic and responsive to client needs. We have to come up in ORCA, a system in ORCA whereby we can do that quickly if that's what it comes to.
Will there be standardized fees for personal vocational adjustment, community-based work experience, targeted vocational assessments?
Yeah, in general, I'm not sure if we decided on the PVA because there's different ways that happens. Sometimes there's classes that's given, sometimes provided individually, but with a curriculum, and sometimes it's really just kind of a one-on-one as the person needs. But with TVAs and CVWAs, community-based work assessments, and targeted vocational assessments, we're talking about prescribing the fee, the amount of hours, the duration and time, how many times it can happen, with exceptions there, obviously. But.
And I think for personal vocational adjustment, we've been looking at the counselor determining a per hour basis, and so there'll be a per hour cost that the counselor would then judge what's needed, and on an ongoing basis to complete what you need to do to make the client successful.
All right, at this point, we're going to go ahead and stop taking questions. Hopefully we got to the majority of them that are out there. If not, we are going to be accepting feedback, as I just had up there on the slide for a little while. But I wanted to touch on a couple things before we got off the webinar for today. The big one being, where are we going from here? As Robert talked about earlier, we do have some more vetting to do with our partners, with our job placement providers. We'll be doing that, a presentation tomorrow, very similar to this one, with our job placement providers, taping that as well and putting the information on the public-facing website after that presentation. We will be accepting feedback from that group as well for 10 days or so. I think we're going to go a little longer with the staff and getting feedback from you guys, because it really is the system from your standpoint that is our #1 priority. So we'll be completing a draft of services and definitions from the feedback from staff as well as from stakeholders, and getting that back out via email for another quick review. So please get your input in as quickly as possible. We'll be having those stakeholder meetings over the next, we'll be having the one with vendors tomorrow, and then following up with the SRC the beginning part of May, at which point we hope to have pretty much a finalized draft, so with your input already included. Take some input from the SRC, run one last check through the branch managers, as well as an email out to the staff, and have this process completed and 2 contracts by the 15th of May. In order to make that happen, we're going to have to complete our service flow and definitions, which we're obviously still working on. There's still a lot of unanswered questions. We're going to have to set up a contract administration and management plan. We're not sure what that's going to look like, but we're going to work with the Office of Contracts and Procurement on that. We'll also be working on a procurement method as well as a payment method. There's a possibility that our AFP process of issuing 5 AFPs can be simplified, and we'll be working with contracts and procurement on that so that we're not issuing an AFP and making that our full-time job, rather freeing us up to be spending our time with our clients. We'll also come up with a better quality assurance system, because as Robert talked about earlier, you can write the best contract in the world, but if you don't have quality assurance and you're not following through on it, that contract can fall apart pretty quickly. And we'll obviously be developing training and materials. As Callie alluded to earlier, we'll be having a couple of work groups to come up with some of the materials we'll be needing for this contract. So once again, if you're interested in joining that, it's Sean Mole, S-E-A-N-M-O-L-E. I only spell that because it's one of the few things I can spell in the world. We'll be setting those work groups up and asking for participation via email as well. If you do have feedback or have additional questions that we can help clarify when we do the training, please send that feedback, those comments, concerns, anything you have about the job placement contract as we've proposed it today. Please email those to Callie Roush. She's obviously a recognizer as a vendor coordinator. She's obviously been doing a lot of work on this contract as well. And her email address is on this page. It would help her out a lot if in the subject line you could put JP webinar feedback or job placement webinar feedback. That'll allow her to sort them and be sure that we're not passing any over, because I'm pretty sure she's going to get inundated with email by sacrificing her email inbox for this project. But we really wanted to be sure that staff had someone personally to reply to and give feedback to. With the vendors, we'll be having them give our feedback to a general mailbox, and we'll be using that one. We're asking that you get that feedback to us by the 29th, which will give us a couple days to make any changes we want to make to this process before we take it to the SRC. However, if you've got some stuff that comes in after April 29th, that's fine. But if you want it to be included in the material that goes to the SRC, and we'll want that as close to the 29th as possible. At this point, I think we're tying things up. I'm going to be finished here in a second. I will send things out. You'll look for an all-staff emails later today that'll have the PowerPoint presentation, the 2 flow sheets we went through, and the definitions that we put up on the screen briefly earlier. I think we'll actually also go ahead and send out to you a set of definitions that are a little more detailed and are a little bit more in the flow of the process, kind of the process definitions. So look for those later today, early tomorrow morning. And at this point, I think we're going to tie things up. Unless Robert, Joe, or Callie have anything to say, we'll go ahead and sign off. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Bye.